Hi guys! Happy Easter! I want to show you step by step how I made this awesome Easter basket and Easter eggs. I'm super happy with how they turned out. These started as a bit of an experiment. I was thinking ahead to Easter recently and thought it would be really cool to try to throw Easter eggs on the wheel. And then when I was throwing the eggs, my oldest son came up and said,
I was just thinking having a bowl and Easter eggs would be really cool together. Like when you're done with the eggs, you can make a bowl out of the stuff that's left.
and I thought, why not? Sounds good to me. So I ended up throwing 9 eggs and 1 bowl, which I turned into a basket, all from the same chunk of clay, except for the handle. I do have some limits. These were thrown off the hump, which basically means you throw something smaller off of a bigger piece of clay. I started out by centering the top piece I'd be working with and pulling it up so I could just work with that bit of clay. I'm ignoring the main chunk of clay and just working with the ball on top at this point. I opened up the clay and then started pulling the walls, making it into an egg shape after the walls were sufficiently thinned out. Then it was time to close the top. Theoretically, this really just involves gently pushing the clay in until it closes, but like most things on the wheel, it can be easier said than done. Once it's closed, it's basically a clay bubble, and the trapped air pressure makes it easier to shape without collapsing. So yeah, these look a little funny when they're first closed, but it does get better. I decided to throw these pointy side up, but either way will work. That just felt easier to me. I smoothed them more with my sponge, and then they needed to be cut off the hump without cutting through the bottom. And trust me, I've cut through the bottom before. It can sometimes be hard to tell exactly where the bottom is when thrown like this, but I managed, and I even got a compliment.
That egg worked out well.
Thanks.
Good egg.
And then it was on to the next egg, and the next. My kids were in the studio with me this day, and they were quite interested.
What are you making now, Mom?
Another egg.
Egg.
For Easter? Is Easter coming up?
It is. I love it when they come and hang out with me in my studio. They enjoy watching me work on different projects and even make some things of their own. I can always count on them to have fun ideas, creative ways to look at things, and I know I can count on their honest opinions.
That one's a failure, kind of. You can smoothen it out. This one, the rough. What are you doing with those things?
Easter eggs.
One doesn't. Oh, those look nice.
The first one does.
Yeah.
The second one kind of like messed up a little bit.
Yeah.
It's more than a little messed up.
Yeah, but the first one looks gorgeous.
They're so fun. They're just hilarious. And I did manage to salvage the dropped egg with some trimming. So I touched on throwing off the hump a bit, but I wanted to talk a bit more about it while I finished throwing the rest of the eggs. Throwing off the hump is a bit different from typical throwing, as you just work with the top chunk of clay and not the whole ball of clay at once. You use a bigger chunk of clay to throw multiple small things. These eggs were also closed form, meaning they were a hollow enclosed shape like a bubble, so that's not typical either. Throwing off the hump allows smaller items to be thrown quickly, as you don't have to constantly grab a new ball of clay. You just work off the bigger chunk of clay that's already on the wheel. Also, with throwing off the hump, you don't have to center the whole thing to begin with. You just have to center the top piece of clay that you're currently throwing with. Sounds good, right? It's also tricky. And I find it harder to get consistent sizes, as I'm not weighing out individual balls of clay, making sure they're all the same size. My kids did notice the size difference too.
Tiny egg! Even more tiny egg!
Oh, I love all the cutesy tinies. They're adorable. They're my favorite. All the cutesy tinies are.
dang it.
Wow.
It did like sled down.
It's okay.
It's totally fine.
It's okay.
But it's so
We're great.
It's the cutesy litter of the egg pack.
I don't throw off the hump very often, but I decided that it would work best for this project, and I should get more practice doing it because it is cool and useful. Then it was on to throwing the bowl part of the basket with the last of the clay. I just threw this like a typical bowl. So as we go along, you may notice that I'm not perfect. I dropped an egg or two. These are not the same size at all, and some of them are less perfectly egg-shaped than others. I am not a machine. I'm not even a production potter. I do sell only quality work, but it's also handmade, and it's okay if it looks like I made it with my hands. And also a side note, we used to own some backyard chickens, and those birds do not always lay the picture-perfect eggs you buy in the grocery store. So these are actually really more realistic anyway. After throwing the eggs and the basket, I let it all dry to leather hard. I did poke holes in the eggs so they dry more evenly on the inside too. Then I threw a chuck for trimming the eggs. This is just some clay to hold the eggs steady, so I could trim the bases as I don't have a flat rim to rest on, like a bowl or a mug would have. I debated about the best way to do this, and got to thinking of egg cups like you'd used for a soft-boiled egg, so I went with more or less that shape. After throwing the shape I wanted, I dried it out a bit with a heat gun. Not all the way dry, just dry enough to not stick to the eggs as I trimmed them. The chuck ended up working really, really well. The bigger egg sat taller, and the smaller egg sat lower in the chuck, but it held them all securely for trimming. I did smooth them all out with a soft sponge after trimming, just to make them even smoother. I had thrown the eggs with the pointy side up, so when I went to trim them, I shaped the other end like the more rounded end of the egg. At this point, they really do look like eggs. It's so cool. I also trimmed the bowl, just a simple foot ring at the bottom. Then I worked on the handle for the basket. I decided to try something different than my normal handles, and do a twisted handle. The idea was to make it look like a basket, without actually weaving the clay. I just rolled a semi-thin coil of clay, twisted it together, and shaped it to be the handle. I really like how this handle turned out, and I could see doing handles like this again. It was simple, but really pretty. Then I carved the bottom bowl part of the basket. I knew I wanted to do the basket in a jade green color. It's one of my favorites. So I thought adding some simple lines to the bottom would give it a grass-like look for springtime. I covered the eggs and basket overnight to give the handle time to firm up a bit, but not too much. Then I attached the handle by scoring the bowl and ends of the handle and using vinegar to attach it. Generally, when I attach a handle, I do it to the side of a pot, not over the top. So I got creative with adding some support to the handle while I attached it, and it firmed up. I did remove the plastic jar as soon as the handle could support its weight without bending. Had I left the jar in, the handle would have cracked as it dried, as clay also shrinks when it dries. Then I moved on to carving the eggs. I enjoy coloring Easter eggs with my family for Easter, and we usually draw designs on them with crayons before dipping them in the colors. So I was thinking of some past designs we've done as I did this. I kept these fairly simple with lines and dots, flowers and stars, and different designs on each egg. I do find complex designs to be beautiful, but I find that a lot of the time, a simple repeating pattern works just great. I wanted these to be whimsical, and simple carving worked best for that on this project. Then it was on to more drying. This time they dried all the way to bone dry. Pottery will explode in the kiln if not fully dry, so this is important. Then they were loaded into the kiln and fired for the first time. I happened to be also firing some little sauce bowls, so I put them into the bowls so they wouldn't roll around. After they were fired to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit and they were cooled, I unloaded them. None of them exploded. Yay! Okay, that's not usually an issue for me. I've had only one pot explode ever, but that explosion was in the same kiln load as the eggs, so I was a little nervous. Then it was on to glazing them. I had a few goals with glazing them. I wanted them to be fun and colorful and did not cover up the cool carvings I did, so I used the Amico Celadon line of glazes. I use these a lot in my work as they show carvings well, and I do like carving. I did 3 coats of each glaze on the eggs and the basket, and that's why I'm speeding up the video so much. You don't want to sit through it real time, trust me. Glazing is not my favorite. Then it was back to the kiln for an even higher firing, this time over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. I glazed the whole of the eggs, and glaze will fuse to anything it's touching when it's fired. So that's why I'm loading them onto my homemade stilts. This was made by rolling out clay and then poking in some high fire wire, and it works great. It does leave little stilt marks in the glaze, but I'd rather have little stilt marks than partially colored eggs. The basket was not glazed on the bottom, so I just put it on the shelf like normal. After firing for about 12 hours and cooling for another day, they were ready! I just love it when a project turns out how I pictured. And yeah, my kids do love it too. They've been pulling the eggs out to look at each one. I saw that one of them had lined them all up along the table the other day too. Pretty funny. I'm partial to the sky blue egg. I just love that color. Which egg's your favorite? Let me know in the comments. Also, check out my other cool video linked here, and my website link is in the description. Thanks for watching, and happy Easter!